This hour we have the Politics Hour with our host David Brew and his esteemed guests. This is going to be quite the conversation, I hear, so get ready for some good old-fashioned politics. David?
What is the proper way for architecture to engage in politics? Take it away, Marrikka.
Whoa. Okay. So, one thing that someone said on a jury earlier this morning, and actually it wasn't just someone, it was Michael Hayes. We were talking about some of the things that are characteristic of SCI-Arc theses versus other projects in other schools, and he said it's really nice to see that people here at SCI-Arc are content to just do pure form. Then he said, the way that Michael Hayes does, that kind of like nice pregnant pause, pure form, mere form. And I was struck by that, especially coming from Michael. Hi, Dana. Join you. Oh, please
Welcome.
do.
Welcome to the
And
table.
we have
Welcome
Dana
to
Cuff
Hardball.
of UCLA joining us. Okay, so I was struck by that because I would hold, actually, that pure form, so-called mere form, is actually political, that aesthetics are deeply political, that creating things in the world that are surprising or unsettling or beautiful to some unusual degree, or even ugly to some unusual degree, a la Butterfield, is actually one thing that architects do with a particular expertise, and it's an expertise that matters. And it's an expertise that can change the way people think and the way that they can imagine their futures. So I would say one of the primary ways that architecture is invested in politics is in the production of surprising or beautiful or wonderful or rare or in some other way special objects that then transform the environments into which they're placed.
Well, that sounds pretty shallow.
Here you go, Greg.
I mean, all of those acts reinforce certain commercial, industrial incentives, right? They all direct commerce in a certain direction. They all direct habitation in a certain direction. We don't imagine, for instance, a black drug dealer at the top of the Seagram building. There are certain political persuasions that are shared in architectural environments, and they tend to exclude, just like Bunker Hill does, people who do not share those proclivities. And so I think that just the form is already kind of a generic reaction to the status quo of politics.
Could I just respond? Should I respond back? This is hardball, right? Okay. I actually think one of the deep powers of architecture is its power of exclusion. I think that architecture is exclusion. I know I said the other thing that we were supposed to say, but I'm just going to say it anyhow. I think that we have the ability in architecture to put up barriers that can protect special worlds. They don't all have to be special worlds of privilege. We are capable of producing other kinds of special worlds. In fact, sometimes we can create barriers that keep ridiculous, fancy people in and allow the rest of us to move about. But I think actually boundaries, the condition of boundaries, the condition of discreteness, the condition of being able to produce interiors that are different than exteriors and exteriors that are different than interiors and multiple interiors and multiple kinds of exteriors is one of the true powers that architecture has. And I would argue that part of the way that happens is through novel formal techniques, things that make you stop instead of just continuing about your mindless consumption. Or your mindless habitation, or whatever the heck you're doing with your life, make you stop and consider, or make you pause, or make you wonder, or turn your what should be a routine into a surprise. That's not something to take lightly, nor do I think it's shallow.
No, but I think it is a social tool.
I think both of you are just completely wrong. The reality is I think you are looking at architecture in the most myopic way possible. You are looking at architecture in a way that your field of study allows you to just look at it in the one, whether it be aesthetic, whether it be form, whether it be an idea of allowing people to be in, out, or otherwise. architecture actually is the structure of the world in so many ways. There's an architectural design to everything we do, including politics. And the fact that you don't engage in the discussion of politics in a way that informs it because its structure is currently lacking of design, the way that politics acts today is acting in a factless based belief system, which architecture challenges every day. You go around thesis, and architecture challenges the means by which one looks at things and asks you to factually find a way to make it different. And if you aren't challenging politics in that way, then you are taking what your thought and the manner in which that you exercise your practice every day and leaving it by the wayside in the engagement.
Okay, so I think you're all wrong. I mean, if that's the game we're going to play. I mean, it seems to me that the most interesting conversations about politics and architecture are less at the theoretical level or at the sort of broad level, and really in a very specific circumstantial level where you can think about a particular politics in a particular place at a particular time. I have a feeling Marrikka would agree with me with this. But it's 100 years now from when the Bauhaus opened, right? 1919. And at that point, we understood architecture is political, right? It was shut down by a regime. It was egregious. We could look at why that particular architecture caused such a reactionary result from the fascist governments that saw it as a threat. But today, to me, to say architecture is political is to say, and architecture is environmental. I mean, of course, it is. It's only interesting when we take a particular circumstance. So let's take affordable housing in Los Angeles today. All right, that's hyper-political, and it needs thoughtful architectural responses, and we could evaluate a number of different affordable housing projects in terms of how they met certain social needs, economic needs, architectural interests. But unless we think about it in specific terms, we're always talking about something that is actually not very relevant to contemporary students or practitioners or developers or politicians.
One way that I synthesize some of the thoughts, I think, is that one, and it's a very general and hypothetical way of thinking about it, but it is a kind of ambition and responsibility. It's a kind of relentless pursuit of future, right? That we need to be ahead. We have to be thinking ahead. And that's very political in the sense that we have to anticipate, right? How things are going to change, how we have to adapt to that change. You know, whether it's environmental, whether it's about the economic concerns. I mean, one of the things where I think we fail right now is in a sense that we're not harnessing or exploiting the tools that we have at our fingertips, right? I mean, that we can empower designers in a more productive way with our technologies to produce things, affordable housing, whatever it might be, right? That we're not, that we tend to want to still treat these tools purely as an experimental process in the development, if we talk about form, as opposed to development of affordable or affordable housing or whatever that might be, right? So I think that's one of the things where I think we can definitely lead in a sense is those technologies that are now here, we're teaching them, but we're not necessarily teaching them towards that end.
I love the idea that you're talking about looking toward the future, because I don't know, Jerry, you would know better than I whether the development community understands the profound social changes that are happening with the sharing economy, with ride hailing, with right now, I was just visiting a new dormitory at UCSD, San Diego. It's like a resort hotel. They've had to furnish it in the way with upscale furniture and so forth. So they're breeding university students to want a certain lifestyle as they step into their role as adults. And it's surprising to me that we've adopted this commercial attitude.
I would say yes, the development community actually 100% understands that. It's the political community that does not understand that yet. And I guess, Dana, that's what I was trying to say earlier, was my point is to leave it to how you look at form. It is the specific, but it's taking your mechanism, your way of thinking, and applying it to the specific instance and being informative of politics is the role of architecture right now, and informative in the way that Craig said, and informative in the way that you've described, but in a broader way. You not just to each application which is demanded, but also to the systemic that hasn't been addressed yet. And I think that there's a way to do that. And when you talk about affordable housing, or you talk about the way in which the future is looking, politics is out there just running rampant, not really just reacting to things without any facts or thought to them. And it's incumbent, I think, upon architecture to actually inform the system to stop that kind of free fall that they're in.
I think it's important that we not get confused about architecture versus design thinking in general. And it's true that architects are experts in design thinking. And it's true that architects often make forays into politics and are quite successful at it because they bring certain problem solving skills to the table, because they're able to reformulate, known problems into unknown ones, and therefore find, more innovative solutions to them, etc. But there is something to be said for the myopia you rightly accused some of us of. Maybe that only applies to me at this table, because actually myopia and the kind of obsession that implies, right, is a way to develop deep expertise. And one of the ways that we combat kind of a general malaise of sort of surface consumption, the unthinking consumption of what's being thrown at us, or the unthinking production of images which are then just made to be consumed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. One of the ways we do that is by developing deep expertise. If we lose that, then architects actually lose the ability that you so kindly, so generously ascribe to us.
I, once again,
Deeply disagree.
really disagree, because operating in a silo is exactly what I think is symptomatic of what's wrong with architecture now, because architects have been reduced to stylists and to people who put a veneer of marketability on their projects, as opposed to having a more lateral sensibility that is not encased within a particular peer group of people, but who actually interface theirs with the other arts, with political writing, et cetera, et cetera. So there.
Maybe I'd like to shift the conversation just slightly, because it seems to me that one assumption that underlies some of the conversation we're having is that form and politics can't really go together. And that's a kind of assumption that I think has been plaguing the history of architecture and our practices for a long time, that if we do political work, we can't also be formalists. Or if we're doing a formal project, we have to smuggle politics in, or a social perspective, depending on what we mean by politics. And I guess there's a few flaws in that I would say. One is the idea, in a kind of trivial sense, that we're always political. So let's just set that one aside. Like, that's not interesting. That's just the case, like environmental. But then it seems to me to treat architecture as a homogeneous practice is another flaw in that the way Craig wants to do politics might not be the way I want to do politics, right? And though you're called an architect and I'm not, even though I think I've had a bigger impact on architectural form through politics than probably anyone at the table. And that is not something that should write me out of a formal project, which tends to be what happens, right? And then people say, oh, you're a social, political activist, but you probably don't really like, Craig's last theatrical project, which of course is the opposite of the case. So I think to imagine the architecture-politics relationship as a singular thing and have it being opposed to form is a flaw in the way we might think about the conversation we're having. Does that leave it as a dead topic, or?
No, I guess I don't think I do disagree. I think that's part of where I started, but it's. I think on the practical, though, I mean, if I take you to the practical and what you just said, you're right. Politics, architecture straddles all aspects of politics as well as the private sector work that you do. one of the few industries that actually exist both inside City Hall and outside City Hall is the architect. The architect is in informing the city on the buildings that they build. The architect is outside informing the developer on what they do. And they are the communicator between both form and policy around those buildings, and can straddle the two, and you don't take enough advantage of those opportunities to help articulate where design should go, what's happening in the communities, what's happening for the future, and how you can be informing both sides of the equation.
So could I ask Marrikka, would you say then that if you're right, would you need two different kinds of schools to get the kind of deep expertise you're talking about? So now I'm going to take it back to education. Maybe that's not the only application. Obviously, maybe it's not even the most important one. But would you think, all right, there's a series of educational precepts that must be pursued, and we can't teach how to take advantage of this dual role and do all these other things. That just has to be something that evolves later.
No, absolutely not. I think we can definitely do both at the same time. And actually, part of the kind of love that we try to cultivate in students for this discipline, however diversely defined, it is training them to speak with passion and to communicate with, sort of earnestness and resolve, whoever the audience is. And sometimes we do a terrible job at it, and we produce people that can only say like the last 5 buzzwords, right, and don't know how to talk to anybody who isn't in their group. And other times we do an awesome job at it, and we forget to give them something worth talking about. So, I've seen it go both ways, and I've worked at many different, different institutions that have very, very different attitudes towards that. But I think it doesn't have to be an either or any more than it has to be a conversation of form. Either you do form or you do, affordable housing. You've got to be serious one way or the other. I think you can be serious and joyful in all those ways all at once.
One of the, for us, just to be very specific, we have series of studios which are immersive and built within the communities. At different scales. And certainly we're talking about Kentucky. So we have a small town. We have a studio space which is really enabling students to deal with those small towns, the community, not only leadership but also the community, and just understanding what a stakeholder is, right, and how to impact. In a way of understanding what is that relationship and what is the potential of you as a designer architect to work with the community towards a kind of common goal, right, to understand it. Now, this isn't, not every student has that experience. We have one in Louisville as well, which is dealing, with immersed for 3rd year now in a neighborhood, but it's also working with them and trying to understanding, using those skills that we do develop in our students to work and listen to the community, to understand how design can have an impact. Students need to learn it too. They don't necessarily understand what that means, right?
I'm going to actually agree with you on this, okay? Wow. No, because I do think it responds to both, and I think there is a perfect example of it, of where it responds to both, and where the school or the institution has been myopic and yet extraordinarily effective in responding to a need. And that is, if you look at the charrette, the school-wide charrette that SCI-Arc did on homelessness. So that brought in the political, it brought in the development community, it brought in a broad base of coalitions to address a singular issue, and then myopically focused on a deep dive into the exploration of the issue, and then came up with a variety of strategies, utilizing kind of the thinking in the way that an architecture school does and the way it tries to profess teaching. And it has successful with some of its students, and with other students it wasn't, but it produced a wide range view on a topic that is very topical, right? And in that way has started to address a problem and brought in a broader audience, and now is moving out into the broader community to effectuate change. So through what you've said as your discovery, you have done both. And I think that these are successful strategies that need to be employed in the influence of politics.
The missing link there, and what I think SCI-Arc is doing and what the silo does do, is to develop the facility, creative facility, and the ability to, in fact, embrace a multitude of problems and make an entity out of them. And if architects open their minds more to the collaborative process and then applied their facility to that. And so that there was truly a flow between your world, Rika's world, and Dana's world. Then I think that intensity of like being in a conservatory, is it not on? You've really distracted me. Anyway, that facility, which is what you pick up in a conservatory, so that you can play Mozart and Shostakovich and all those people and read the score, architects developed that facility, which is fantastic. But they do know to learn how to listen. Wouldn't you agree, Dana?
Yeah. So what you're talking about makes me think of another question. I'm not supposed to be the moderator here, but yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
so
good.
this is just
But I'm
free
wondering
fall.
if in the 60s, our thinking about sort of the politics and architecture of the city was, I don't know if you'd agree with me, but that we were proposing utopian projects, basically, kind of outrageous, didactic utopian projects. Think Archigram. Okay, so do we have a new project about the sort of future of the city today? Are there new strategies that we should be using for politics and architecture today? Or do we really never fulfill the promise of the kind of model you're talking about, which is that we take students into the community, we actually work with them, we try to get them to be empathic and build something different outside of the kind of, I guess I would say since 2008, the star architect has died. Okay? Great. See ya. I don't miss that at all. You think that's wrong?
I think that's wrong.
Well, I think that's a possibility. And I think that maybe we would say historically there's something interesting that could replace it, which might be this more, full-bodied architect in the city operating with form and expertise.
I don't think the star architect has died, actually. But I think one thing that has happened is that the star architect has gotten very disconnected from the academy, and in a way is operating less in the United States. So we're not so much confronted with star architects, but actually star architects are out there designing massive projects in deserts in Saudi Arabia, for example. They're still active, but they've become a force that's no longer the way that we define the avant-garde. And I think you're absolutely right that leaves us with an interesting opportunity. I would put two different possibilities on the table, neither of which are new. The one would be maybe the kind of update to the old Jürgen Habermas idea that we create robust democracies by allowing institutions and expertises to build highly defined spheres of expertise. So in other words, then you have a whole bunch of very different things working together where no one thing is dominant. Like, it's not like finance or the law governs the city, but you have finance, the law, different real estate interests, architects, urbanists, all these different people sort of active at the same time, and together with their kind of clashes and with the way they don't communicate well, they actually form a robust possibility for the city at any given time. The update to that might be something like Chantal Mouffe's agonistic democracy, which is an approach to kind of keeping the hegemonic seat of power empty. Right? So what you have is, just like we're all sitting around trying to disagree with each other, what you have is a bunch of people who are fighting for very specific things, but they're fighting around a kind of common center. And no one person is able to achieve enough power to go do exactly what they want. So the architect never gets to design exactly the building that they want, which is some kind of pure myopic object, pure form, to use Michael Hayes' term, in the city. But neither is the developer completely allowed to dictate a Disney-like kind of a fantasia of a resort for students to kind of get accustomed to that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that would be something really productive for us to start kind of moving moving our pedagogy forward towards in schools, right? So how do you get it so that you've got enough difference, enough grit, enough kind of pushing back against a particular student project so the student is still able to develop the expertise that makes them valuable in society to begin with, while at the same time teaching them that they've got to be able to go across the aisle? Sorry, that was long.
No, but interestingly, I think the answer to your question or to what you posed is I don't think the star architect is dead. I think architecture is dead, to be honest. I think the architecture as a means of true influence in a community, architecture as a true means of influence in politics, is gone. It's been ceded. You guys left it in the 60s and you've never recovered it. It has been replaced by the economist. It's been replaced by the community. It's been replaced by everyone else as they view architecture, this ivory tower discussion that doesn't have true influence within their lives, and is left. Now, I don't think that has to be the case. In fact, I think it shouldn't be the case, which was my argument at the beginning. But I think you have ceded the territory of true influence in politics, true influence in the community to others. And I think until you decide to say, I'm going to step out of that and truly engage in the political discourse, truly engage and demand that politics respond to the needs of architecture and inform and of all the things that you do in design, you have lost or ceded that seat to others.
Yeah, Jerry, I'm really glad you said that. Somebody had to say that. And, you know, it's been...
End note.
Look, my positive note in that is, quite frankly, there is no one better to lead this community and to lead the idea of design than architects. And I pray, and I pray you all do that.
Thanks so much for joining us in the Politics Hour. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Architecture and politics never ceases to get old. So thank you for joining us at the Spin Room. We'll be back in about 20 minutes with our tour of the graduate thesis exhibition. Thank you.